Okay, we're streaming, so you can stop sharing, Luna, and I'll turn it over to Susanna.
Hello, and welcome everyone to the Tuesday afternoon at 12:15 Eastern Time press conference titled Molecules in Strange Places. My name is Susanna Kohler. I'm the editor of AAS Nova, and as of this fall, I will be stepping up to take over for Rick as press officer. And I will be your MC for today. I'm assisted today by two fabulous grad students. The Astrobytes media intern for this meeting is Luna Zagoratz, and she will be monitoring the Q&A for this session. And the AAS media fellow is Tharni Kunchati, and she will be keeping an eye on the Slack channel. And press officer Rick Feinberg is also here with us, and he will be hanging out in the background, keeping an eye on everything and correcting our Latin pronunciations of star names and our astronomical distances. We will presumably, I actually didn't check, we may have a few press releases from this briefing, which we will distribute afterwards. All of the releases that we received from yesterday's briefings are in the press kit on the AAS website, and I had dropped the link to that in the Slack earlier, along with the briefing videos from both of yesterday's conferences. So for anybody who hasn't been to one of these before, I'll just walk through how we're going to do this. We are recording this briefing, and this will be live streamed to YouTube and later available for view there. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to the topic and introduce the panelists and their presentation titles. Then each of the panelists will go through and speak in order, and then we're going to move to the Q&A. So we're using the built-in Q&A function in Zoom. If you look at the bottom of your screen, underneath our pictures, you'll see a button that says Q&A, and there you can type in your question. Please be sure to include your name and your affiliation and who the question is for. And then we will go through and answer those at the very end of the briefing. We've asked the panelists not to look at the questions until later so that we don't distract anyone. And note that you can upvote questions if you find them especially interesting, so then we'll ask them at the end in order. We've got the Slack channel available for any other chat. And yeah, I think we're ready to get going. So most of astronomy, a lot of astronomy tends to be looking at hydrogen atoms, but today we are diving in a little deeper and we are looking at molecules, and in particular, the strange places that we've recently detected them and what this tells us about the universe. So the order is a little different from what might have been in the press kit earlier. We're going to be starting with Kate Gold from Bryn Mawr College and Debbie Schmidt from Franklin and Marshall College. And they'll be presenting on the molecular content of planetary nebulae, the next level. Next up, Lucy Ziurys from University of Arizona will present on ALMA imaging of molecules in planetary nebulae. Then Lilia Koelemay from University of Arizona will present organic molecules at the outer reaches of the galaxy. And lastly, Annie Hughes from IRAP will present the giant molecular cloud population of the local universe. So Kate and Debbie, take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Gold, and today I'm presenting with Debbie Schmidt of Franklin and Marshall College. And today we're going to be talking to you about the molecular content of planetary nebulae and our interesting preliminary results. For more information, you can see poster number 130.05 on the same topic, and the QR code on the bottom left links directly to this poster and will be available after the conference. Planetary nebulae are some of the most beautiful sources, as you can see on the sample sources on the left. They're incredibly diverse objects and also very scientifically interesting. So planetary nebulae mark the final stage of low mass stars, such as the sun, and most stars are going to evolve into planetary nebulae. In this stage, the star's outer layers are ejected and they flow away from what is a very hot remnant core. And then they form these extended sources, as you see on the left. And the core is so hot that the UV radiation it emits should destroy any of these molecules that are left left over from earlier stages in the star's life. And so if these molecules can survive then in such extreme conditions, then it can help answer big questions about stellar evolution and material in the interstellar medium. We know that planetary nebulae form an important role in the recycling of gas and dust in the interstellar medium and the galaxy as a whole. On the left of this slide, we include an image showing this recycling, where material is ejected from a star in the planetary nebulae stage and becomes incorporated in the diffuse ISM or interstellar medium, from which new stellar systems eventually will form. So if molecules can survive in these harsh conditions, then they can be incorporated in new stellar systems and serve as building blocks for even bigger molecules to form, including molecules that are, say, necessary for life, such as DNA. And so here we have some examples of some prior observations by the Ziurys group. These are from 2016, and in that work, they've detected several molecules in around 20 different planetary nebulae. These molecules include HCN and HCO+, which we're going to be talking about in our presentation, and many more beyond that. And these earlier studies suggest that planetary nebulae are just full of molecules, rather than being depleted over time, as was published in some earlier models. And so on the left, we show some of these planetary nebulae in which the Ziurys group had detected many of these molecules. The detections raised several questions. Are these 20 particular sources special, or on the contrary, are all planetary nebulae molecule rich? And so this then presents a spectrum, and then along the spectrum of molecularly rich or perhaps depleted, how common are molecules in planetary nebulae? And that brings us to the recent research in which we observe HCN and HCO+ in additional 13 sources. And we're using the sub-millimeter telescope and the 12-meter telescope, both of which are in Arizona. And on this next slide, they're shown on the left. And these are the same telescopes that were used to observe the earlier sources in 2016.
Okay, so I'll take over. So to the right here, we have some optical images of the nebulae that we've been studying. So these objects are diverse in a number of obvious and also not so obvious ways. So for one, they have strikingly different shapes or morphologies, from more spherical or elliptical ones, hopefully you can kind of see my cursor here, to ones which show much more complex bipolar outflows like these I'm trying to circle here. And so how these nebulae acquire these fantastical structures is something that's going to be discussed a bit more in the next talk by Lucy Ziurys. Less obviously though, but even more important for our purposes, these nebulae span a range of ages, and these are indicated to the bottom right of each optical image here. And these ages mark the time since the onset of the planetary nebula stage, which lasts on the order of tens of thousands of years. And so why this is so important is something that will become evident shortly. So in order to identify HCN and HCO+ in our target nebulae, we look at their spectra. Each molecule has a unique spectral signature, or series of spectral signals that occur at particular discrete frequencies. And so just like by comparing a fingerprint to a sample, you can identify a person, observations of spectral lines like the ones that you see to the left here can be used to identify that molecule in space. And so by employing the 12-meter telescope and the sub-millimeter telescope, as Kate mentioned, to observe the spectral signatures of HCN and HCO+ at different frequencies, we were able to detect at least one of these molecules in 11 out of the 13 nebulae in our sample. And so combining this with the previous detections that Kate mentioned, this brings the number of nebulae in which we've made detections so far to over 30. And so it seems that wherever we look for molecules, we find them. And it's becoming increasingly clear that molecules are not just strange anomalies that have been observed in a few unique cases, but they're actually common in planetary nebulae. So I mentioned before that the diversity of nebular ages would be important, and now I can tell you why. So by analyzing the molecular detections that we've made, we're actually able to determine just how much of a given molecular species exists in a particular nebula, and this is called its abundance. And this is important because, as Kate mentioned earlier, the remnant core at the heart of a planetary nebula is so hot that it should destroy any molecules left over from earlier in the star's life. However, by plotting the abundance of HCN and HCO+ that we've determined for the nebulae that we observe against their age, and those are represented by these points I'm trying to circle here, the stars and the sideways triangles, you can see that these abundances really don't change over the planetary nebula lifespan. And this completely flies in the face of model predictions, which are represented by these triangles connected by these dotted lines here. And so what this data is telling us is that against all odds, molecules are surviving in the harsh, extreme environments of planetary nebulae. And this is important because, as Kate mentioned earlier, planetary nebulae play a vital role in recycling gas and dust in the universe. And so by surviving the planetary nebula stage, these molecules can seed the surrounding diffuse interstellar medium from which new stellar systems emerge. And these molecules can then provide the building blocks that are needed to create even more complex species, potentially all the way up to those that are needed for life. And so in other words, you don't need to start from scratch to create these incredibly complex molecules. You can start with these polyatomic building blocks that are provided by planetary nebulae. And this is really important because otherwise getting the right number of atoms together in the right place at the right time to form these large complex molecules would be extremely difficult in the low density environments of the diffuse interstellar medium. Oh, and I meant to show this cycle again. So the material from the planetary nebula is seeded into these diffuse clouds, which becomes incorporated into these newly forming stellar systems. And so in summary, we found that molecular material survives the planetary nebula stage, which is in complete contrast to model predictions. These molecules can then disperse into the surrounding interstellar medium from which new stellar systems form, and they can be used as building blocks to promote the molecular complexity that is needed for the origin of life. I'd like you to thank you very much for your attention, as well as the hard work of our collaborators, Lucy Ziurys, Anne Sinclair, and Sophie Bergstrom, and the support of the institutions that are listed here. And I will stop my share now.
Okay, am I on?
You are,
on.
yes.
Okay, great. So today I'm going to talk about some new data we got from the Atacama Large Millimeter Wave Array, ALMA, of images of these molecules you heard about in the previous talk in 5 planetary nebulae. Now, planetary nebulae, as mentioned in the previous talk, are very important in our, in the evolution of our galaxy and in all other galaxies, typically, because most stars go through this phase. So understanding them and their evolution is really important in understanding stars and stellar evolution. Planetary nebula also chemically enrich the interstellar medium and bring all these elements into the interstellar medium to form clouds and solar systems and stars. And there's a real puzzle with planetary nebulae that they come from the asymptotic giant branch phase. This is where they evolve from, the giant stars, red giant stars, and asymptotic giant branch stars, which are typically spherically symmetric. And then as planetary nebula form, they go from the spherical symmetry to bipolar symmetries, multipolar symmetries, some strange elliptical geometries. And we know that these images exist because we observe these nebula with their bright atomic emission lines, as you see in these images I just showed. And so it's a big question for astrophysics, is how are these planetary nebula shaped? No one really understands it. No one really knows why one goes from a spherical geometry to these non-spherical shapes. Now, as mentioned in the past talks, planetary nebulae were always thought to be composed of just hot atoms and hot atomic ions. This is because There's a white dwarf in the center of a planetary nebula that emits a lot of UV radiation, and it ionizes things. And this is, of course, seen in the optical images of planetary nebula that we know so well. So it was a big surprise to find that many planetary nebula are molecule rich, and the material those molecules are tracing are the colder and denser material that people thought didn't exist in these nebula previously. And we observe molecules in the radio and millimeter region of the electromagnetic spectrum. And because of that, we're now able to make molecular images of planetary nebula with ALMA. And this is what we've done as a preliminary work. We've looked at, and this is what you do. You have a spectral line such as HCN and you make an image of it. So we looked at CO, HCN, and HCO plus using ALMA. Very powerful instrument. And what do we find with ALMA? Well, I'm just going to show you some of our images. Here is one of the nebula we looked at, M2-48. There's the optical picture. You can see it's bipolar. It has two big lobes. The star is in the center here, and there's almost kind of a dark lane in between those two lobes. Here's the ALMA image in carbon monoxide. Doesn't look anything like the nebula, at least at first glance. And there's the image in HCN, shows a bipolar lobe and a center structure. But when you overlay the CO image over the optical image, you see that the molecular gas is tracing that dark dust lane in between the two lobes. So the molecules are obviously in this bifurcating disk in this source. And you can see how interestingly and complex the velocities are in these molecules by looking at this movie. Whoops. Here we go. There's the blue shifted gas coming in, and then intermediate velocities, and then the red shifted gas. So the molecular gas traces a very interesting velocity field, almost reminiscent of a rotating disk. Another nebula we imaged was M3-28. That's an older nebula, and it's quadrupolar in geometry. You can see the four lobes exist. And here's our ALMA image in carbon monoxide. We'll see how it fits onto that image right there. And you can see, once again, the molecules seem to be tracing a disk, and the lobes are perpendicular to that disk. HCN and HCO plus were also imaged, and they sort of trace the disk itself, rather than these arms, which are apparently channeling the optical outflow. Another movie showing the complicated velocity structure. Blue shifted, there's the intermediate, almost showing a disk, and red shifted. I'll show that again. Blue shifted, a disk, red shifted. We made images of three more planetary nebulae, M1-7, K3-58, and K3-45. Here are the optical images. You can see they're all bipolar nebula, and the molecular gas, once again, appears to trace the inner part of the nebula, not the bipolar outflows, in a sort of a disk and even a ring-like structure. And so these images have really given us a new perspective on planetary nebulae. These images are revealing previously unseen structures in these nebula because they trace the cold gas, the dense gas, not the hot ionized material that's been observed optically for decades. We see the presence of possible disks, arcs, even perpendicular outflows to the optical outflows. And a big question is, how is this material shaping the planetary nebulae? And that is what we're working on right now. But the point is that these ALMA images reveal new complexity in these structures, trace material unseen before, and hopefully this will be our clue to understanding the shaping of planetary nebula. With that, I'd like to make some acknowledgements. I'd like to thank the institutions, University of Arizona, Arizona Radio Observatory, ALMA, Franklin and Marshall College, Bryn Mawr College, and NSF and NASA for funding. We have a UA press release coming out that's indicated at the bottom of the slide. Also to thank the undergraduates that have helped, including Kate Gold from Bryn Mawr College, and thank you for your attention.
Howdy, my name is Lilia Koelemay, and today I will be discussing organic molecules at the outer reaches of the galaxy. The galactic habitable zone is the region of the galaxy where life could have potentially formed. Currently, it is traced by star formation, supernova, and the amounts of carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. Here's a depiction of our galaxy overlaid with the currently accepted boundaries of the galactic habitable zone indicated by this lighter orange color with our sun as reference. The boundaries are 7 to 9 kiloparsecs from the galactic center. Recently, the organic molecules formamide and formaldehyde were found in molecular clouds at distances indicated by this darker orange color. These molecular clouds near the edge of the galactic disk are very cold and very dark and have little star formation compared to the clouds at the inner parts of our galaxy. We decided to continue the search for organic molecules, starting with methanol and cyclic C3H2. We surveyed 20 molecular clouds with distances ranging from 12.9 to 23.5 kiloparsecs from the galactic center. Most of these clouds are located in the spiral arms of our galaxy, as seen in this picture here. The observations were completed using the Arizona Radio Observatory's 12-meter telescope on Kip Peak at 3 millimeters for methanol and 2 millimeters for cyclic C3H2. Here's a picture of our brand new 2 millimeter receiver. This receiver is top of the line, incredibly sensitive, and really opens up the 2 millimeter window. What would have initially taken 100 hours of integration time per source was cut down to 20 hours thanks to this new receiver. Here's a spectra of one of our sources, WB89621, which is located about 23 kiloparsecs from the galactic center, which was close to the outer limits of our search. These 4 lines right here serve as methanol's fingerprint, which allows us to detect it from so far away. Methanol was found in 19 of our sources and is an important complex organic molecule with crucial biochemical roles. It serves as a precursor to ethylene glycol, which is found in antifreeze, acetic acid, which is your common household vinegar, and it also serves as a precursor to glycolaldehyde. Glycolaldehyde is itself a precursor to the ribose sugar, which forms the backbones of DNA and RNA. Here's a spectra of another one of our sources, WB89640, where you can see the fingerprint lines of cyclic C3H2, which was found in 19 of our sources. While cyclic C3H2 does not have any biochemical roles itself, it's still an important precursor to larger ringed molecules, such as the sugars fructose and glucose seen here. These sugars form carbohydrates, which are present in our cell membranes. While we were searching for cyclic C3H2, we also noticed these very small lines, which we determined to be nitric oxide, which is a testament to how incredibly sensitive our new receiver is. Nitric oxide is not an organic molecule itself, but it still has very important biochemical roles, such as in our circulatory systems, it acts as a vasodilator. It's present in the neurotransmitters in our brains. And in plants, it prevents oxidative stress and helps signal plant growth hormones. The question becomes, do we have a region of organic molecules, an organic zone, or an Oz, if you will, in our galaxy? Clearly, organic chemistry is prevalent throughout the galaxy, even without heavy star formation or heavy element production. Here I've overlaid a depiction of our galaxy with our sources and the sun shown here in reference. The blue circles indicate the abundances of methanol in each of the sources, and the yellow circles indicate the abundance of cyclic C3H2. As you can see, the abundances of these molecules do not drop off as you go out from the galactic center, which is surprising because we know that the amounts of carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen do drop off the further out you go. This Oz could indicate regions where the conditions for prebiotic life are right and could extend the galactic habitable zone to the edge of the galactic disk. In summary, organic molecules were discovered near the outer reaches of our galaxy. The abundances of these organic molecules appear to be independent of galactic radius. The Oz, the organic zone, can be extended to the edges of the galactic disk. And we will also be continuing our search for organic molecules at the outer reaches of the galaxy, beginning with methyl cyanide, which serves as a precursor to alcohols and amines, glycolaldehyde, which as we saw was a precursor to the backbone of DNA, phosphorus-containing molecules, etc. And then I'd like to acknowledge the other members of the series group, the NSF and NASA for funding. And this will be the press release link, which will go live, I think, at the end of this. Thank you.
Annie, you're still muted.
Thanks, Debbie. Susan, sorry. So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Annie Hughes. I'm a researcher at IRAP in Toulouse. I'm here today to present new results from the FANGS-ALMA survey of nearby galaxies. And in particular, what the FANGS-ALMA survey is teaching us about the giant molecular cloud population of the local universe. So to set the scene, it's important to remember that star formation is the primary engine of galaxy evolution. So as galaxies have evolved through time from the early universe to today, it's the process of star formation, that's the creation of new stars out of the interstellar gas and the tremendous energy that's fed back into the interstellar gas by those newborn stars that largely determines what galaxies look like and how they evolve. So inside galaxies, star formation is happening in cold, dense regions, which are called molecular clouds. So in the galaxy image on my slide, the population of recently formed young massive stars is glowing in pink and clearly tracing out the galaxy's spiral arms. And the dark patchy structures that you see are chains of molecular clouds that are so dense that they block the starlight from the stars behind them. And within many of those dark molecular clouds, a new generation of star formation is already getting started. So as this image clearly shows, there's an obvious connection between the organisation of star formation in galaxies and galactic structures like spiral arms. But until now, it has been debated whether galactic structures also influence the properties of the molecular clouds themselves. So in other words, it was not yet entirely clear whether the molecular clouds in the spiral arms were different in any fundamental way to molecular clouds in the centre of the galaxy or in the interarm region. So most of what we know about star formation comes from detailed studies of about 20 molecular clouds in our galaxy, the Milky Way. So these Milky Way studies have given us exquisite images of star formation in the molecular clouds near our sun, like these images of the Horsehead Nebula in the Orion B molecular cloud. And so what we've learned from those Milky Way studies is that molecular clouds make about 10,000 stars during their lifetime, that they contain about 100,000 solar masses of cold molecular gas, and that they survive for roughly 10 million years. However, one question that these studies can't answer is, are molecular clouds the same everywhere throughout the universe? And this is important because if molecular clouds vary systematically, then their star formation activity is also likely to depend on where they live. So to determine whether molecular clouds are the same everywhere, we need to study molecular clouds across a wide range of different types of galaxies and in galactic environments that are very different to the conditions around the sun. And this is exactly what the FANGS-ALMA survey has done. We selected a sample of 90 galaxies in the local universe, covering a range of properties like galaxy mass, global star formation rate, and morphological type. but that was still close enough for us to be able to identify individual cloud structures. And we used ALMA to map the emission from carbon monoxide molecules, which are a tracer of cold molecular clouds, everywhere across their galaxy disks. So here I'm showing FANG's ALMA maps for 9 out of our 90 galaxies, and now I'll zoom into a few. And so in these maps, every bright orange blob is a molecular cloud. And by making the FANG's ALMA survey, we've increased the number of external galaxies with well-studied molecular cloud populations from a handful to 90 galaxies. And more importantly, we've surveyed molecular clouds across a range of galaxy types and galactic environments where they had never been studied before, which means that we can now robustly link molecular clouds and their star formation activity to the properties of the host galaxy. So across our 90 galaxies, we have identified almost 40,000 individual clouds, and that's roughly 20 times the number that were known previously. And thanks to these much improved statistics, we've demonstrated that molecular clouds have quite diverse characteristics, but that there are systematic variations linked to the galactic environment where the clouds live. So to explain the 2 new results that I'm showing here on this slide, in high density environments and the center of galaxies, and these are the regions that contribute to the yellow trend lines on the plots that you can see on the slide, molecular clouds tend to be denser and more turbulent. And these regions also tend to build larger, more massive clouds. But in low density regions and the outskirts of galaxies, so these are the pink trend lines, molecular clouds tend to be less dense and their internal motions tend to be much more calm and quiescent. And these regions also tend to host smaller clouds. So these variations appear to be linked to changes in the star formation activity and in the evolution of those clouds, which strongly suggests that star formation does not happen everywhere the same way across and among galaxies. So to sum up, molecular clouds are the star factories of the universe. FANG's ALMA has identified 40,000 molecular clouds in 90 nearby galaxies, which is a 20-fold increase over what was known from previous observations. The survey is allowing us to link galactic environment to the characteristics, star formation activity, and lifetimes of molecular clouds for the first time. Science analysis of the FANG's ALMA survey data is ongoing, but we already see that clouds in high density regions and in the centers of galaxies are denser, more massive, and more turbulent than clouds in low density environments like galaxy outskirts. And that these systematic variations in giant molecular cloud populations of the local universe are an important input for models of galaxy evolution, which use the trends that we see locally to describe how star formation occurs in more distant unresolved systems. And so with that, I'd like to acknowledge the fantastic work of my collaborators in the FANG's team and refer you all to the FANG's website for the data, for scientific papers and more beautiful images. And I'd like to thank you all for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. We will now move into the question and answer session. So Luna, take it away.
Sorry, Susanna, I'm unable to start my video until you, Susanna, I'm unable to start my video until you started because you stopped it. Or a host stopped it. Someone realized that I forgot to stop it and stopped it for me, and now I can't turn it back on.
Rick, I think you need to do that.
I can also ask without video. Thanks, Rick. All right, lovely to see you all. All right then, so I am going to be asking the questions that are in the Q&A. Reminder that you can still drop some, and also if you see a really good question, you can upvote it and we will prioritize questions that have been upvoted. Okay, perfect. So I am going to start with a question from Bill Waller of the Galactic Inquirer for Lucy. Do Spitzer mid-infrared observations help to constrain where in the PNE the molecules exist?
Yes, to some extent they do, because mid-infrared, infrared observations trace dust, and usually molecules and dust are mixed. And so if you trace dust, you trace the molecules. I just don't know how many of these nebula have actually been imaged in the infrared, the mid-infrared, because it's originally thought that, you know, this was really hot ionized gas. And so I think there's some images, but it's something that could really contribute to furthering our understanding of planetary nebula if we had more infrared observations of these objects.
Okay, great. So the next one is for Kate and Deborah from Lawrence Gross Sky and Telescope Intern. Is there any clue as to what mechanisms allow these molecules to survive such intense UV radiation? What could have caused previous chemical models to be incorrect such that they predicted the destruction of these molecules?
I'm happy to answer the first part of that question. And I'm going to share kind of an additional slide. Let's see. And so one of the mechanisms that we think is protecting some of the molecules is something called cometary knots. And so these are clumps of material about, say, 10 to the 6 cc's of density, which are able to protect some of the molecular content. These are just rather dense regions, which are found in many planetary nebulae. On the left, we include an image from the Helix Nebula. And there's been several examples, such as the Helix, where these knots have been found, and thought that later these clumps will disperse and seed the surrounding interstellar medium with the molecular material.
And would you like to hazard a guess at the second question, or is that your full answer?
Maybe Debbie can answer it.
Well, I mean, so my presumption is that perhaps, you know, shielding, the extent to which shielding is protecting this molecular material was not fully accounted for in these prior models. Lucy, would you agree with that?
Well, I think that they tried to account for it with clumping. In fact, the most recent model deals with clumping, but they simply can't get it right. And there currently is no models that can explain the molecular content of planetary nebulae, which is, you know, this evidence is just overwhelming. And I think that it's going to require perhaps even more dense clumping or something else that people haven't thought of yet. It's an interesting problem.
All right, thank you, Kate, Deborah, and Lucy. So the next couple of questions actually are from Leah Crane of The New Scientist. So the first one is for Lilia. You said that this could allow us to extend the gigahertz all the way to the edge of the galaxy. Did we previously think that life would be impossible out there?
So I think she's referring to the galactic habitable zone. And it's not that it's impossible, but certainly improbable. We only really have one data point where we know that life exists. And so we try to base our guesses around like what we have in our solar system and in the air, at least our local area in the galaxy. And so out at the edge of the galactic disk, there are fewer stars that could possibly be like our sun in that they could support life the way we know it exists. There's not as much carbon, oxygen, nitrogen to form the organic molecules out there. And there's also fewer supernova events, so fewer heavier molecules that we know form like planets and other solar system bodies.
Okay.
In general, we don't know where life is in our galaxy, right? And could it be at the outer edges? It might. Finding these organic molecules was something of a surprise, so maybe there's more surprises to be had. We don't know. Would you say that's correct, Lilia?
I think so.
So can I just ask a clarifying question then? Does that mean that the galactic habitable zone is based purely on kind of this description of the chemistry of the different regions of the galaxy? It's determined empirically?
So right now it's based on star formation and supernova events and metallicity, so a little bit of chemistry, but more along the lines of just star formation.
Okay.
We're trying to add to the importance of the metallicity in determining where the galactic habitable zone is.
Got it. Thank you.
Presumably, you know, the carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen abundances drop as you get 20 kiloparsecs from the center of the galaxy. And so that would say that molecule formation would be reduced, but it doesn't appear to be the case. So once again, this is a situation, as Deborah mentioned earlier, that, you know, molecules are present in regions we don't expect, and they survive, and they're quite abundant. And we're going from this view of the galaxy as an atomic entity to more of a molecular entity. And that's a big change in the paradigm in astronomy.
All right. The next question from Lilia, and the last question I'm seeing right now, so audience, please feel free to ask more questions. For any of the first few speakers, how do these observations of planetary nebulae and clouds at the outer areas of the galaxy relate to each other?
I can take that unless Debbie wants to.
You might be the best equipped to answer that one.
Oh. I think it all goes back to a theme that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, that we're finding molecules in places that they weren't supposed to be, okay? Either because the radiation field was too harsh, or there wasn't enough elements to start with. And it just turns out that molecules are extremely robust, and their formation mechanisms occur a lot faster than we previously thought. And these projects relate in the sense that, you know, we're beginning to see more and more of a molecular universe. You want to add anything, Debbie?
Well, and I mean, also, so for instance, Lilia mentioned like identifying cyclic C3H2 in these environments, and we're also seeing cyclic C3H2 in planetary nebulae as well. So that's another area in which they relate. We're seeing, you know, these similar species.
Anybody else have anything to add to that question before we move on? Okay, so the next one is for Annie, again from Lawrence Grow, the Sky and Telescope intern. Could these variations in molecular clouds have implications for how stars are formed from such different MCs? If so, what future observations are needed to narrow down the role that these different MC characteristics may have in star formation and subsequent planetary formation?
Okay, thanks for the question. Yeah, so definitely we would expect that if the molecular clouds have different properties, it would certainly affect their star formation activity in terms of, you know, how long does it take for them to form a certain mass of stars, or how long does it take for the molecular clouds to be destroyed, and so how long can they keep going in this cycle of star formation activity before they're entirely dispersed. So we certainly have the expectation that the variations in terms of the density and the sort of internal turbulence of the clouds will have an implication on their star formation activity. In FANGS, we're still trying to work out exactly what those implications are. Like, it's not just a simple matter of the clouds are more massive and so therefore they form more stars, and then we say that everywhere. It's not at all that case. We see massive clouds in the center of galaxies that are actually remarkably poor in star formation, but massive clouds elsewhere in the galaxy seem to be forming lots of stars. So there's a few different things. We're working hard in FANGS on trying to use different traces of star formation to actually measure the timescales of star formation in different environments, and also the efficiency of star formation in different environments. That can be done by comparing the FANGS ALMA observations to observations, for instance, from HST and Mawr of different stages in the star formation cycle. And then I would also say that looking sort of further ahead and more related to the topic of this briefing, we'd also like to look at other molecules from the clouds they're molecules which are excited at higher densities and allow you really to pinpoint the dense knots within the molecular clouds, which are actually even more closely connected to star formation than the CO molecule. Those observations, which we can do with ALMA, sort of take much more time because those molecules are fainter. And so it's not possible today to just survey 90 galaxies with the resolution of those dense molecules. But targeted follow-up for some of these clouds in different galactic environments for these other molecular traces would be an obvious step to take. And then as for the last part about the subsequent planetary formation, I think you just have to keep in mind that the scales that I'm talking about are really a long way from the formation of planets. So yeah, I'm not sure that there's any immediate impact of our results on what we know about from the formation of planets.
All right. Lauren says thank you. And Liz, could you please type who your question is for and what publication you're with? I'm going to read out the question just in case. I imagine it's a follow-up to Annie, but does the data speak to whether the molecular species are continually being made within clouds or were sourced at one time and are simply persisting?
I'm not sure I'm the best qualified person on the panel to answer that question.
Which clouds are we talking about?
So as an update, I'm an educator at Bowdoin College. Thank you, Liz. And the question is for anyone. So not necessarily for Annie, I apologize.
Okay, I think I can answer that. I think all these data, at some extent, suggest that it's both happening. That when you have material ejected out of planetary nebula that are molecular and they end up in these clouds, we have the seeds to start molecular formation, but molecular formation continues within the cloud. So both actually occurs. And so some persist and some react and form other things.
Liz says thank you. Any more questions from the audience?
Can I be part of the audience for a minute?
Sure, go ahead, Rick.
Thank you. I have a question that may be for Annie, and it may be for Lilia, and it may be for both of them. So the spiral arms, neither of you really mentioned the spiral arms, but my understanding is the spiral arms are, are taking regions that are not dense and making them dense. And clearly that's related to star formation and the possible enhancement of molecular reactions among atoms and so on. So I'm just wondering, how do you disentangle the role of spiral arms from just a general radial dependence that you might have expected in the abundance of molecules as you get farther out from the centers of galaxies? And since you both look like I mystified you, either I'm unclear or I picked the wrong person to answer the question. Lucy, you look like you wanted to say something.
Well, I think you have a very good point there, that it could be that the reason why we're seeing molecules and molecular clouds at the edge regions of the galaxy is because, the spiral arm has swept up the material, condensed it, the densities have gone up, and of course, as the densities go up, the collisional rates go up, and you can form more molecules. So that's a very good point. And I think the molecular clouds we're all looking at the edges of the galaxy are all in two spiral arms. Lilia, can you remind me which ones?
The Cygnus and Perseus.
They're in the arm. So maybe that's part of the answer to why those molecules are present. That we've actually enhanced, the densities. Now, I think in the methanol observation, we actually could calculate what the densities were, and they were pretty high. We had enough spectral lines to model it with radiative transfer, and the densities were about 10 to the 6 particles per cc, which is pretty dense. That's the density of a giant molecular cloud. So maybe that's a good point, Rick.
Okay, you can just list me among the co-authors when you get to the paper.
Okay. That'll be your retirement present. No.
Thank you. So now I have a question that I thought was for Lucy, but now maybe it'll be for somebody else. Do you have plans? Well, it looked like most of the nebulae you looked at with ALMA were bipolar, were obviously bipolar. Have you looked at any, or do you have plans to look at any that don't have an obvious bipolar structure and don't have that, dusty disk that's bifurcating the nebula? And if you have looked at some already, do you still see molecules?
I mean, I could try to address that if you'd like.
I'm picking the wrong person every time. All right.
No, you go first, Debbie. Go first.
Sure. So you're talking specifically about ALMA observations then?
Yeah,
Or okay.
Right. The high resolution ones that showed where the molecules were. They always seem to be in that disk that was bifurcating a bipolar nebula. But some nebulae don't obviously have that bipolar structure.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're not bipolar. It's just based on their orientation, it's not obvious that they're bipolar.
Okay. So my answer, and Lucy can interject if she has a different opinion than me, is that, so we're particularly interested, I think, in these bipolar nebulae because recently we've been studying isotopes, rare isotopes in planetary nebulae. And what they have been indicating to us is that there's a strange enhancement of these rare isotopes that could be indicating some explosive process that happens towards the end of a low mass star's life. And that could possibly be connected with these bipolar outflows that we observe from planetary nebulae. So personally, I think that we're interested in continuing perhaps with more ALMA observations of bipolar nebulae, but I would also be interested in observing like elliptical planetary nebulae as well and seeing if we see some similar results. I don't know, Lucy, what your opinion might be.
I think, of course, that's a very good point. We specifically targeted the multipolar, bipolar ones because that's what the modelers are interested in. But it would be good to try to, do an elliptical one or one that's obviously not bipolar. It seems like almost every one we've looked at is bipolar that is molecular. Isn't that correct, Debbie?
That's true. We only have a handful of elliptical nebulae that we've looked at that we've detected molecules.
I think CO has been seen in them, and so you can easily image CO, and it would be very interesting to see where the molecular material is in those sorts of morphologies. So that's a good point.
Can I jump in here with a question too? Kind of on the same subject, Lucy, you had mentioned that we don't know what causes asymmetries in these. And you said, okay, maybe this molecular gas now is shaping the ionized gas, but that's just translated the problem. Why is the molecular gas asymmetrically distributed? Are there thoughts on this?
Okay, so there's two ways you can view it. You can say that the molecular gas is shaping the ionized gas, or the ionized gas is pushing the molecular gas out of the way and training it and shaping it. So it could go either way. Now, it could be the stars evolve from a spherical AGB star with a molecular envelope that's pretty spherical, but it's inhomogeneous. So it could be as the star starts turning on the UV and the material starts flowing away, it just happens to find places in the envelope that are, less dense, and it just punches through. Okay, that could be one explanation. Another explanation is and this is links to what Debbie is talking about, we see some very unusual isotope ratios in these nebulae, which is a whole nother talk. And enrichments of carbon-13 and nitrogen-15, and that sort of points to some sort of helium flash that may be occurring at the end of the AGB. There's various theoretical papers on it, a very late thermal pulse, they're called. And this might be causing energetic outflows to explode from the star, and it just sweeps the molecular material out of the way, okay? Now there's other scenarios where you have a binary system, and one of the signatures of a binary system is a disk, and it could be the molecules form the disk first, and this is orienting the outflows, okay? So there's a few scenarios that really need to be pursued, and since this data is new and we're just really looking at it, and I don't think theorists have even seen it, there's a lot more that's going to come. what's amazing is that people have been making models based on only a certain amount of the material. And there's other structures and there's other material that needs to be taken into account. And maybe the mechanism will just sort of fall out because now everything's in place. Or previously they were just thinking of the ionized gas, the hot gas. So.
Do we have any data on the rotation rates of the precursor stars? Is there any reason to think that, that it could be something as simple as rotation that creates the asymmetries?
I think there's some thought that it is partly rotation and magnetic fields.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that. Possible.
Hopefully with the high spectral resolution we get with ALMA, we can really carefully look at the velocities, at least of the molecular gas. So that's another, plus in doing molecular observations as you get the high velocity resolution. So we'll see. It's amazing that, people have been observing planetary nebula for, decades and decades and way back when, and yet we really don't understand them. And you'd think that these are some sorts of objects that would really be well understood after they've been studied for so long. So it's just amazing how, the universe fools us.
Rick, did you have any others?
Nope, I think that'll do it. Thank you.
Great. Anything in the Slack, Tharni?
No questions, but Rick has posted 2 press releases, one from NRAO and one from the U of Arizona, that cover all the results that were discussed during this briefing.
Perfect. All
So
right.
we're just a few minutes from the end of the session. Anybody from the audience want to ask one last question or vie for co-authorship like Rick did?
Well, I'm just going to take a moment to mention that it's particularly gratifying to me that during this final meeting in my role as AAS press officer, one of the presentations is from Lucy Ziurys, who went to college with me. We used to do our physics problem sets together. We lived in the same residential college at Rice University in Houston. And Lucy, you'll be interested to hear that one of my sons is about to settle in Houston. So I've got a good excuse to be going back to Houston more often. But I just think it's kind of poetic that someone who was around when I first became a real astrophysicist is giving a press conference that I organized.
Well, that's terrific for you to make those comments, Rick. It seems a long time ago, but I do remember working on those physics problem sets until wee hours of the morning in the commons of Baker College. And I think we took that introductory astronomy course together too.
Right. And
that was taught in part by Reginald Dufour, who passed on a few weeks ago. And and one of his main areas of study was planetary nebula. And I remember him showing all kinds of beautiful pictures of them in our class. And I just find it very interesting that that's what we ended up working on, 30, 40 years later. So,
and obviously you're turning it over to a whole new generation of
yes, a whole new generation. There's only younger faces here, not older. And
yeah, that's great.
We appreciate all your work as the main chief press officer of the AAS. And I remember all the work you did for Sky and Telescope too. And it's going to be a little, hopefully you can make the next AAS meeting and we're all in person. And
that's my plan.
It's going to be a little strange. And when you finally head off to New England and retire.
Oh, he's never going to retire. Not actually. He'll be at all the meetings.
That sounds good. That sounds good.
I'm still going to be around.
Yeah.
I'll just have to get one of those bumper stickers, no job, no money, that kind of thing, but I'm still going to be around.
Perfect. Well, on that note.
Welcome, Susanna, too.
Thank you. Oh, well, thank you so much again to all of our wonderful speakers. This has been a great session. And thank you to everyone who's listening in right now. And thanks, of course, to the public information officers who helped prepare press releases and briefings for this. And naturally, thank you to our sponsor, USRA. So the next briefing is actually not a briefing. It is a seminar for science writers on the James Webb Space Telescope. So it's titled Get Ready for Webb. That will be at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time today. So we look forward to seeing you all there. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you all. You